Hello, everybody, and welcome to Holding On to the Good. I'm Amanda Hopping-Wynn, Director here at the National AIA Resource Center located at UC Berkeley. Today's webinar will be presented by Melissa Sellevaag. Melissa is currently the Manager of Youth and Family Care Navigation at Whitman Walker Health. Comes to Whitman Walker Health through the collaboration with Metro Teen AIDS, where she served as Director of Clinical Services. In both of these positions, she provides direction and supervision on the development and implementation of programs serving adolescents and families infected or affected by HIV/AIDS, including our AIA-funded project, Stable Families. Before we begin, I want to remind you that you can ask your questions via the chat feature in that lower left portion of your screen. We will be pausing through the presentation for questions, but please feel free to chat them in at any point. They will be answered in the order that they are received. And now I'd like to turn it over to Melissa. Melissa, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you, Amanda. It's a pleasure to be here and to be with everybody on this afternoon here on the East Coast, and good morning to you on the West Coast. So like Amanda said, I am in Washington, D.C., and I'm a licensed clinical social worker here, currently working for an AIA project called Stable Families, which I will talk about in just a second. So today, hopefully by the end of this webinar, folks will be able to differentiate between burnout and compassion fatigue, discuss some strategies in retaining high-quality staff, and identify some ways to support your teams and engage in self-care. So ultimately the goal is figuring out a way to hold on to those staff who are really good and potentially make turnover when it's necessary as seamless and smooth as possible for both the agency, the clients, and the staff that continue or remain behind. So I wanted to give you a little information about our program because I think it sets a context for what we're going to talk about over the next hour. Stable Families is a federally funded program through the AIA funding source through Health and Human Services. And we are I like to call us a community-based and collaborative model. So we provide therapeutic case management to families that are impacted by HIV. So they might have a mom who's living with HIV and have children who are HIV negative. They might have a grandma who's caring for kids because mom passed away. And we do have a few families where one or two of the children is living with HIV as well. And my team really looks at what is impacting the stability and well-being of the entire family unit. And we work collaboratively with the family as well as the other systems that touch this family. It could be schools, it could be a health system, it could be the juvenile justice system, the child welfare system, the legal system, and we work collaboratively to make services as efficient and seamless as possible so that there's not a duplication of effort and that clients don't have to have competing case goals. And that they can get as service independent as quickly as possible. That's our ultimate goal, to kind of help them be as independent from services as is possible. So we offer the therapeutic case management I just mentioned, and we also offer mental health therapy for both an individual or the family unit, because we recognize that most of our clients are coming to us. And so we need to be looking at their own experiences and how that impacts their functioning, as well as the family unit and the family system. And finally, we offer a parenting support group for our moms. It's for our moms. And they meet twice a month and go on retreats twice a year, and it's focused on parenting in a cultural context, and we provide childcare and transportation and breakfast and lunch, which enables the parents to bring the kids, have the kids well cared for, the kids get to do something fun, and the parents really get to focus on them. So the folks doing this amazing work are pictured there. We were part of the Halloween contest here at Whitman Walker, and we were all fans. So I was a ceiling fan, somebody was a desk fan, somebody was a window fan, and anyway, we had on our Halloween costumes and got our picture taken. I should say that Whitman Walker Health is a federally qualified health center here in the district, and we have two health centers and on opposite sides of the city from each other, and we provide primary care as well as HIV care. And so we're housed in Whitman Walker, but we operate a little bit differently from some of the other programs. So it's We joined Whitman Walker about a year ago from a small community-based organization, and integrating into a health center has certainly been a fun and interesting process. So if anybody wants to talk offline, we can chat about it. But doing the amazing work are a team of 3 social workers and a community health worker. And we really approach a team model, and I think that this is a key component in retention, which will make a little more sense later on in the webinar. By having a team-focused model, we enable the clients to build a more intimate relationship with one staff member who might be the lead on that case, but they know at least 1 or 2 other staff members. My community health worker works across cases and is often providing support to the clients in getting them to appointments, ensuring that they're accessing TANF and SNAP benefits and WIC, and helping them with adherence stuff. And so she really works across many, many, many different families. And so herself and myself, who provide support along with my other amazing social workers, really allow us to have this collaborative model where if one person is out on vacation or on maternity leave or, heaven forbid, leaves our program, the client doesn't need to build a new relationship from the start. They already have that relationship with at least 1 or 2 other staff members, and we found that to be highly effective. So jumping into retention, which is kind of the core of the webinar, and we're going to focus on factors that impact turnover as well as strategies that we can use as supervisors, as team leaders, as team members to help reduce turnover and really make a cohesive team. But we need to start with kind of what retention is. And according to the Business Dictionary, it's the degree to which current employees of a business remain with the company over a given period of time. I think that that's a great definition, but I think there really needs to be a realistic expectation of how long staff are going to stay in certain positions. When my dad was working, he stayed at his one job that he started after college and stayed there for 35 years and never changed companies. That is kind of the old model, and while there are still some folks who stay long-term at agencies, that's not the norm anymore. What I've heard, recent research is that the average length of stay can be around 5 years, or that people change jobs about 5 times in their professional, quote, lifetime. And given the pay grade, the degree, or the educational requirements, is it really realistic for us to expect staff to stay for even 5 or 7 years? It's kind of been my experience that the higher up you move in an agency, the longer people stay because you almost run out of room to grow. For entry-level positions in social work, it's really my expectation that staff will stay for about 2.5 to 3 years. Once they get their advanced licensure, which in DC takes about 2 years to get, they often want to move on to a different position to develop a different skill set, to get an increase of money, or to go to a position that requires that advanced licensure. I think it's important that we be aware of complacence, and that can happen, and I've seen it happen, where staff stay too long. Either they get really comfortable or they are experiencing burnout and lacking that motivation to leave. And we just don't want folks to get so comfortable that they get bored or they get sloppy. So one of the things we'll talk about in a little bit is giving staff permission to talk about what they want to do in the future. I also think there are times when turnover can actually be a good thing. And I'm sure if you think back to experiences with colleagues or supervisees or even yourself, you'll recognize that there's been at least one experience where the fit just wasn't right. I've had an experience at another agency where a staff member was hired, and it turns out that the work they were partaking in was triggering for them based on their own experiences. And they thought that they had done enough of their own therapy work to kind of handle that, and it turns out that when they were in the thick of it, it was just too much. So I think that's important to know that there are going to be times when turnover is good because the fit just wasn't right, and that's okay. That's actually an important thing to be aware of. looking at the impact of turnover, and we're going to move into why do people leave, and then how do we keep people. But I think we need to first identify the impact of turnover, and we've all felt it. Staff leave, other staff members and supervisors have to absorb the caseload. This can actually increase the potential for burnout for the remaining staff. It can have an impact on morale, and it can even have an impact on the quality of work with the clients. I think it's important that we help the remaining staff manage this transition. So understanding that when somebody leaves, somebody's going to have to absorb the work. Clients just don't go away. They don't just disappear. You can't tell them just hang on until you've got somebody hired. And in most cases, there's a lag between when somebody leaves and when you're able to hire. Not only is there an impact on the remaining staff, which I think is a fairly obvious impact, but there can be a fiscal impact, unspent monies and salary line items. So you have to think about how you're going to manage that with either your funder or your agency. And then especially if you're implementing an EBI or an evidence-based intervention or program, it's important to look at fidelity of that program. So if somebody leaves, are the other staff members able to continue to implement that program with fidelity or the way it was intended or designed? And when you hire somebody, what type of training is going to happen to help them understand how to implement with fidelity? If you're not doing a specific evidence-based intervention, there is some wiggle room with that, but I think that's an important factor that we often miss, is that the fidelity of the program, and how do we consider that? And obviously there's an impact to the clients. So the clients trust the program, right? They come in, they get to know the staff members, they build rapport, they build trust, they disclose things, they start working on goals, they start achieving things, and then somebody leaves. And the first thought that I've heard people say is, I don't want to tell my story again. I don't want to have to start over. You're just going to leave too. What's the point? And so it can really impact clients. And so helping somebody when they leave in a very ethical way, making sure that there's a smooth transition, and we'll talk about that obviously. That's really important so that the impact on the client is minimal. But it's also important to note that clients could end up leaving your program because a staff member left. It's not unrealistic to think that a client ties their successes not to themselves and the work that they've done, but to the worker. And if without this worker, I'm not going to be able to achieve something. And finally, it can impact outcomes. They might fall out of care. They might stop going to appointments. They might stop adhering to medications. All things to think about, and we just need to make sure that we're acknowledging the impact on clients and not dismissing that, and also not expecting clients to immediately bond or build rapport with that new. I think it's important that clients know that we understand this, and that while we may not have walked in their footsteps, we're going to acknowledge and talk about that big white elephant that might be in the room. Give them permission to talk about the impact that staff turnover has on them. So thinking about why do people leave? I think this is super important to consider. And I'm wondering if folks looking at this list can raise your hand if you've ever left an agency for one of those reasons. I believe at the top of your screen you'll see a little raise hand button, and you can click that. And just let us know if you've ever left for one of these reasons: burnout, compassion fatigue, values that weren't congruent with the agency, family demands, growth opportunities. Looks like a lot of folks. Wonderful. Thank you so much. You can lower your hands. So it seems like folks can really relate to this, that why people leave. You've either experienced it yourself or other folks have experienced it. And these are just a few of the reasons that I've found that people are going to leave agencies, or that I've left for myself. We're going to talk about burnout and compassion fatigue in greater detail in just a minute. But I wanted to touch on incongruent values because I think sometimes this isn't acknowledged or discussed or even really thought about. And I've had friends who have accepted jobs, and once they are in the agency, they realize that their values don't match that of their supervisor. So it's not even at the agency level. Sometimes that's very obvious because agencies might be very overt with their values. They agree in this, they don't agree in that. If they're religiously affiliated or faith-based, their values might be one way. If they're government agency, it might be another way, and et cetera. But even if your values don't align with your supervisor, that can also lead to a barrier. So, for instance, what if you have clients who are, if you have strong beliefs one way or the other about clients who engage in commercial sex work, or a client who might want to terminate a pregnancy, and your supervisor's values don't match that, that can lead to some challenging interactions in supervision in helping the client kind of navigate that tricky path. So it's important that looking at your values, that of your supervisors and that of the agencies, and make sure that they line up, because if they don't, that can make for some really tricky and sticky situations. I think family demands is also really important to acknowledge. I myself have actually transitioned because of this. I started a job before I had children. I had children, and then once I had children, I realized that the long commute just wasn't working for my family or my own mental health. And so I transitioned to make the demands and the stress less for me and my family. And I think that's important. If you're staying at a job, life can change for yourself. And so that can often be a reason why people leave. And finally, this is what I hope when my staff leaves. I hope they're leaving because of a growth opportunity. I would love to think that I've supported my team in learning what their strengths are and helping them to grow, and that can lead to other job opportunities. That's the ultimate for what I would like. All right. So let's talk more specifically about compassion fatigue versus burnout. I feel like this is a fairly hot topic now. Trauma-informed work is a catchword. As folks want us to be engaging in trauma-informed work, and there's a lot of trainings on trauma and the impact it can have. And I know we've been experiencing with our families here that the intensity, the vulnerability, and the complexity of what they're experiencing has increased over the past 2 years. And as that complexity and intensity increases, so does the impact on our staff, on my team. And so I like to consider us as kind of vessels or containers for a lot of really messy information. On a daily basis, my team hears stories about trauma. We bear witness as our clients share all of their experiences, sometimes in great detail, and we're expected to maintain a safe space and to hold that information. I think it's important we stop and think about what happens when our vessels get full. Can we say no and not answer the phone or not respond to a text? It's important to stop for yourself and for your team to stop and acknowledge the impact that hearing and witnessing with our clients, what that can have on us as human beings. So by choice, as social workers, as helping professionals, we want to be a part of the change. We want to make a difference. We want to leave things a little better than they were when we arrived. And if a boundary is set, that can often go against our instincts to help and respond. If we say, no, I'm not answering that call, I'm not responding to that text right now, that can go against our instincts to be available, to help, to respond. And in reality, boundaries can actually be really vital for both clients and staff. And there's probably a zillion trainings out there that people could provide and attend on boundaries themselves. It's important to note the difference between compassion fatigue and burnout. Compassion fatigue is directly related to trauma. Burnout isn't. Burnout is that kind of ongoing process that it kind of sneaks up on you. It's long-term emotional exhaustion related to the work. The compassion fatigue is that the stuff that's left behind from being exposed to and working with folks who have experienced a traumatic event. And remember, trauma is a personal event. It isn't necessarily, it has to be this, not that. But hearing those ongoing stories can really, really lead to compassion fatigue as well. for staff, and we've all had it, and maybe it's ourselves as well, who have experienced our own traumas, the impact can be even that much more significant. There are studies that show that there's a high percentage of us who are in the helping profession are survivors of our own traumatic experiences. We're going to talk about triggers a little bit later. And as supervisors, there are certainly things that we can't ask, during interviews and during supervision, but kind of being aware that people bring their own experiences with them, and that what might appear overwhelming and exhausting to you may not be so for the other person, and of course, vice versa. I really liked this quote: "The expectation that we can be immersed in suffering and loss daily and not be touched by it is unrealistic as expecting to be able to walk through water without getting wet." That quote really, really spoke to me, because I think we're often viewed as impermeable, that things are just supposed to roll off our shoulders, that we're not supposed to absorb any of this, that we're supposed to let it go and go home and, quote, be regular people with our families or our partners or our pets. About 18 months ago, our team encountered a fairly traumatic situation where we lost a client to a very traumatic death. It was sudden, and it impacted everybody, including myself. I like to use the word, it kind of rocked everybody to their core, and everybody had a different experience to it, and I'll use this example throughout the rest of our time. But what I, as the supervisor, was suddenly faced with was supporting a family who had just lost their mom and had their children put in foster care, and supporting a staff that was significantly impacted by the loss, and then managing my own feelings and response to it. And it was just too much. After about 2 weeks, I realized that this was too much. And while, looking back, there's much I would do differently. Heaven forbid we had to navigate this situation again. The one thing that I did do correctly is I got my own outside support and therapy, quite honestly, and brought in support for my team. I knew that I couldn't be the one navigating, providing that support to my team, because I was too in it. I was too affected by it. I wasn't able to be present for it in the way that they needed, and I needed my own support. And as we talk about the signs of compassion fatigue, I actually experienced most of these when we went through this example that I just shared. And we'll talk about, in a minute, I'll talk about some of the responses and how we brought people in to assist the team. And one of the biggest things as a supervisor that I had to actually grapple with was not being able to meet their needs. And that was really a hard pill to swallow, that I felt like I needed to do it all. I needed to be there for the family. I needed to be there for the systems that were trying to help these children. I needed to be there for our therapist. I needed to be there for my team, and I couldn't do it. And that was actually really hard to swallow. And fortunately, I have some great outside colleagues who were able to provide some support, and we were able to put some systems in place to provide some additional support to the team, so that we could all heal. I don't want anybody to raise their hand, but I want you to look at these signs of compassion fatigue. And I want you to make a mental note if you've experienced any of those. And I don't want you to raise your hand because I want you to maintain confidentiality. So think about dissociation is that kind of you're separating from yourself. And you can do that through the use of alcohol, through the use of drugs, through some people actually dissociate. You can use it by immersing yourself in other activities. So it's that kind of separation. Increase in anger, increase in anxiety, sleep disturbances, nightmares, nausea, and headaches. When that happened with one of our clients, I experienced just about every single one of those symptoms, and clearly remember nightmares, waking up at night, having trouble falling asleep, headaches, and neck pain. And while I continued to work hard to stay present for others and for other clients, my empathy well was completely empty. So those questions of what do you do when your vessel is overflowing and the empathy well is empty? exactly what I was experiencing. What's the impact for those who are the keepers of the stories? How do you balance what is an honor and a burden all at the same time? I believe it is an honor and a privilege that clients choose to share their stories with me and seek out support from me. And I take my responsibility as part of their support system very seriously and honor the fact that we're really often one of the few, if not only people, that they're able to be authentic and share their stories with. However, I can't be naive and deny the impact that it has on me, and part of my responsibility is making sure that I'm attending to that. So I've had to work hard to refill my well and make sure that my vessel has space to share, to make room for other clients. And those questions that I just read are noted. They're ones to remember to ask yourself as supervisors and during supervision. They might be rhetorical. They might not need to be answered. They might just need to be pondered and to raise awareness. I think it's just important that we're aware of what those signs are and that you're actually having a conversation with your staff. They may not understand that a sudden increase in sleep disturbances or nightmares or trouble falling to asleep or waking up or sudden neck pain or headaches, that could be related to the job that they're doing. They may not realize that. I know construction workers often have back pain, right? Nurses have a lot of back pain because you're doing something physical. So you expect that physical toll on your body. I'm not saying it's right or not, but you can make that connection very easily. It's much harder when your work is among people and you're in the human services field, because it's harder to identify it and say X happened, so that's why I'm feeling this way. And that's one of the things that we can do as supervisors. So looking at burnout, again, another quote that I love. As social workers, and I think this applies to more than just social workers, but that's the word that they used. As social workers, we may still not pay full attention to the reality of burnout until suddenly everything seems overwhelming. So we're shifting a little bit from compassion fatigue to burnout, because I want to touch on those before we talk about retaining staff. And I found this great article called What I Wish I Had Known About Burnout and Self-Care in Social Work. And the link is there on the slides. It had a lot of great ideas that I knew somewhere in my head, but it really brought them to life by being in print. And this quote in particular jumped out, as I feel it's true that we often don't pay attention until it's too late. I know historically that I've noticed burnout when I'm no longer feeling like going to work. I have zero motivation to do the basic tasks. My work gets sloppy. The day feels very long. And paying attention to those a little bit earlier may have prevented those severe of reactions. So I think this is something that we need to be attuned to on a regular basis. So, all right, so here's a chance for you to raise your hands again. Here are some signs of burnout: hopelessness, emotional exhaustion, feeling overwhelmed, losing interest, self-doubt. And here's that cat who looked all well and good before work and after work looks a little bit frazzled. Who's felt like that cat before? Who's experienced any of those signs? Give your hand a raise. Who's woken up on a Monday morning and thought, I can't do it? Who started to doubt their work? Who's lost energy for the job? Suddenly, lunch seems a really long time away, and your lunch time gets a little bit longer each day. Who started to lose empathy for their clients? Lots of hands raised. This is great. Yeah, absolutely. I think you're all being super honest with each other and with us, and I appreciate that. Because the chances are is that we've all experienced one of this, or even some of the other signs that we haven't listed. So thank you. You can lower your hands. I've actually heard some social service workers, and some of them are social workers, say to one of our clients, "It's not my fault that you're homeless," or "I only want to push paperwork and not meet with clients," or "I don't have energy for this today." And while saying I don't have energy for this today might be just passing, maybe you had a late night's sleep, maybe you've got a new baby at home and you're up in the middle of the night, or you're caring for a parent or a family member who's ill, but saying things like it's not my fault that you're homeless, that's a pretty clear sign that there's something else going on, because that's not what it's really about, right? We don't even need to talk about that. You guys know that. I've heard people say I'm struggling to find empathy for this person, or I'm feeling really, really frustrated by this client. All of those are signs that burnout might be approaching, or it might be here. And it might just be among, one or two specific clients who are really either triggering for yourself or are in and of themselves extra challenging. So it doesn't have to be across the board. But all of those are pretty good warning signs that something is going on and we need to explore some self-care tactics. We don't want you looking like that cat or feeling like that cat on a regular basis. And we're going to talk about self-care. So I'm not going to leave you hanging. We're definitely going to talk about that in just a few minutes. But I think it's important that first we talk about, how to help them stay after all this webinar was called Holding On to the Good, right? So this first bullet, by nature, relationships are intended to be reciprocal. That's a really important point. We engage in relationships because we both give and get. With a partner, a spouse, a friend, we provide love and receive love. We provide support and receive support. Sometimes there can be an imbalance where one person might be giving more and the other person might be receiving more. So it might be shifting to the person who needs support. But that's usually going to swing around, and eventually the other person will be cared for more as well. Relationships by nature really aren't intended to be one-sided. However, with clients, as social workers and social service providers, we are trained that the relationship isn't supposed to be reciprocal. In fact, we're told it's unethical when it's two-sided. When the client starts taking care of us or starts giving to us, that's unethical. And it can be exhausting to give, and not receive. So we need to figure out how do we balance out this equation, because that's going to help us. Eliminate the burnout, reduce the burnout, make that relationship feel better to us. So as supervisors, I think we can look at reframing this equation and help our staff see that the impact they're having when they can't see it, that can help become part of that reciprocal relationship. So when we remind them and we engage in that giving component to them, that the work you're doing is having an impact. I've seen a change in this client. Or it's amazing, she called you today. She showed up for her appointment. She remembered what she was supposed to bring to that appointment. When we remind them of the small victories, it can feel a little bit less like they're swimming upstream. And that's how we can equal out that reciprocal relationship. I think it's also important to note that clients need to feel some of that reciprocal relationship, so there is a balance there. For many clients, it can feel very stigmatizing when it's just all about getting. They want to feel like they give back. When clients ask me, how am I don't view them as taking care of myself. Of course, it depends on the client, but they're actually interested. Because relationships are intended to be reciprocal, it feels uncomfortable for them just to get from me. So engaging in that dialogue can help make that a little bit reciprocal and can help make you feel a little bit better as well. Again, we don't want it to turn into the client taking care of you, because that's a dangerous slope to go down. Through work with our teams, if you work with a team, and through supervision, we can really reintroduce how this reciprocal relationship is viewed and to help balance out the give with the get. So we're going to talk about how to keep staff, and I think starting with acknowledging those relationships is really important, because I think many of our staff haven't actually acknowledged that relationships are reciprocal, and often with clients they're not. And when I've raised that with my team, they've often had this aha moment of, you're right, you're absolutely right. It feels like I'm giving. I'm working harder than the client. They're not doing their part. I don't understand why this isn't working. And that's when we need to stop and look at kind of their reaction and their emotions in there, so that we can redefine the relationship for them. So again, I'm a sucker for good cartoons, but this says, my short-term goal, so this is a job interview, and it says my short-term goal is to bluff my way through this job interview. My long-term goal is to invent a time machine so I can come back and change everything I've said so far. And this kind of sets the stage for, I really believe it starts with the job interview. Those interviews are often constructed environments where it's hard to see kind of the authentic self of the person who's presenting for the interview and how they're going to work with the team and how they're going to work with clients under stress. And that's why I think the interview can be such an important part of this process. So we're going to talk about that for So I'm not sure how you guys all do job interviews, but I tend to focus on building a team because we have a team model here, and while our staff work, have leads for working with clients. Because we work as a team, it's important that they get along and that they work well together. So a team cohesion is super important for me. So I tend to focus on building a team rather than hiring good individuals. I also believe that if I have 4 of the smartest, most talented social workers in the world, but they don't work well together, I'm going to have a really hard time supporting them and having them support the clients. And eventually they're all going to leave anyway, because we know that when people enjoy the environments they're working in, that can make even a hard job more bearable. So I think it all starts with having a clear understanding of what you might be looking for. Do you need a degree or a certain type of experience, years of experience? If you don't have a clear understanding of the type of person you need to round out your team or the type of person that the clients will work well with, then it's going to be really hard to find the right person. You won't know it if they walk in the room and sit down in front of you. So having a very clear understanding of what you need. So clearly defined roles and responsibilities. You need to limit that ambiguity. Understanding very clearly the values. Well, you need to be careful because of, there are some HR laws regulating what you're allowed to do in an interview and say in an interview. There are ways to phrase questions or interject case examples to kind of tease out how somebody might respond to certain examples, and that's one way to test out the values alignment. I always, 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 always do panel interviews. I have a feeling these are fairly common. I don't think I'm a rocket scientist in this, but this does 2 things. One, it creates buy-in with the existing team for the new hire. And 2, it also gives you an on-the-spot demonstration of how they may or may not click as a group working together. And that's usually something, as social workers, social service professionals, we're fairly good at observing and assessing, and that's what you're doing in a job interview. You're assessing and observing, and often the unspoken is even more valuable than the spoken. I typically screen candidates by phone and then have my staff review the resumes, and then we meet for the panel interview. And here I always provide my staff with questions. I provide them with case scenarios, often which they've helped me create. But I also encourage them to follow their gut and ask questions that might arise for them. We do review legal parameters of what they're not allowed to ask according to HR kind of laws and regulations. But by giving your staff kind of the permission to ask questions that might not be listed on the piece of paper in front of them, it can give you a really good clue as to what their gut instincts are about this person that's sitting in front of you, and it also gives you a good idea of how they're going to work as a team. And regarding the scenarios, I certainly don't expect them to know the answers of how to respond to those scenarios, especially if they're a brand new social worker. But I do assess for their ability to solve problems, including when to ask for help. Because we definitely want independence, but we also want them to know when they need to come and ask for help. The final thing that I do that I think has been helpful to me at least is asking candidates what their triggers are. So this can be a good cue as to what type of clients they might work well with, and it can also give you a glimpse to the experiences that they might be bringing to the table. Now, it's not a causality. If they say, I don't work well with clients with anger issues, it doesn't mean they were raised in a house with an abusive parent. But it can just give you some clues as to the types of clients that might be a good match. You kind of know what the caseloads are and how you might shift things around. And the biggest warning sign is when somebody says they're never triggered, because let's face it, we are all triggered by clients. There's certainly clients that we work easier with and clients that are more challenging for us to work with. So I think that's important. So after you find the most amazing candidate and give them a job offer and they accept, you have to figure out how you're going to get them on board as a team. And this is that process where this is the interview starts it, and this is like step 2 in keeping them. If they're good and you want to keep them for a long time, it starts right here as well. So you know that old saying, you never have a second chance to make a first impression. I think the first impression on the day that they walk in the door to work is super important, because it gives them a clue into how the team works. It gives them a clue into you as a supervisor. It gives them a clue into the workings of the agency. So it's super important, and I know it often falls to the bottom of my to-do list, and I'm running around the night before getting things organized. So setting up a process can actually be super helpful, because then you don't have to run around like crazy the day before. So again, a clearly defined process. The other thing, so as I said, you don't get a second chance to make a first impression. Sometimes having a sign or balloons, which are can cost pennies. Put a sign that you printed out on the computer app saying "Welcome to work" can make them just feel welcome from day one. So this is a team that wants me here. I feel wanted. Now I'm excited. It kind of gets them pumped and can transition some of that energy from anxious energy to productive, kind of warm energy. So being very clear about what do you or what does a supervisor do and what does the team do. And again, just like interviewing is a team process for us, so is onboarding. There are things that I need to take care of as a supervisor, but there's also things that I want my team to do, because from day one, I want them building cohesion as a team. And I'll talk about that in a second. Training-wise, of course, you want to know what they need content, but I think even more than that, because I'll pick some of that up, are those internal processes. I know being trained on how to do timesheets, reimbursements, how to use the copier and make a fax. Those can be paralyzing things. How to log onto your computer, how to get in touch with the IT guy. Those are all really important internal processes that I think sometimes we take for granted, and so being equipped to be able to share those with staff. And then we do a lot of shadowing. So I actually assign a lead staff member to kind of take this, walk the new hire kind of through our process. So they go out with the new staff member. They see clients in the community. They get introduced to our collaborating partners. They go out and meet with clients. They get to look at some of the paperwork that I may have already reviewed with them, but they see it in progress. And again, that's about building a relationship with the team. And I have them do it with that lead team member, but then I also give them a chance to see other team members in action as well. And then finally, as we're doing the handoff with for the new caseload, whoever's been covering that cases, and it's usually me, does that warm handoff. So we do it's a transition process where we bring the new person out. They get to meet with them. We do a couple of those meetings. They're watching me, and then I'm kind of almost shadowing them, and then eventually I slowly extract myself from those meetings, making it very clear that we're a team and I'm still available. Because what I don't want to do is usurp the power, and power is the wrong word, but I don't want to make it appear as if the new social worker or new staff member is incompetent and only I can handle it. I want to make sure that they're viewed with competence. So supervision seems like a pretty no-brainer. Those are my children running in superhero costumes to the Walk to End HIV here in Washington. And I think oftentimes we're viewed as superheroes. Just go out, take care of it, it'll be fine, and everything rolls off your big, strong muscles. But the fact is supervision is such a sacred and important time. It needs to happen weekly, and we need to respect the time, both as staff members and as supervisors. And it's really easy when an emergency comes up to say, oh, we'll meet later in the week, or we'll meet by phone as I'm driving back to the office. We need to hold that time sacred, because oftentimes as supervisors we're looking forward to it, but more importantly our supervisees usually have a lot going on and don't want to feel like they're a bother to you. I think that the safety is listed as a bullet point there, and I think it's super important that we recognize that the space should be safe, physically and emotionally. I want my staff to know that they can raise sensitive issues in supervision. the feelings of not liking a client, feelings of being really frustrated, feelings of being triggered, etc. And that's not going to impact their administrative review. I keep separate administrative supervision with them when it's necessary. I tend to usually handle administrative supervision as a team, and then reviews each week. They're kind of getting feedback on their progress, but those kind of administrative reviews, those happen privately but separate from their clinical supervision, because I want to make sure that they feel safe to come to me with what they need to come to me with, and that those sessions grow in authenticity. And I really, really want my staff to grow. And of course, we're always bringing up boundaries. Boundaries are super important. Boundaries, helping them turn their cell phones off. I have actually, when they go on vacation or they take a day off, I require them to give me their cell phones. I will cover their clients while they are gone, and they need to check out. Staff go on maternity leave. They can come and show us the cute baby, send us pictures of the cute baby, but they are not, no engagement with clients. That is their time. And I try to hold that very sacred, because if I even move an inch on that and ask them a client-level question, that opens the door for them to suddenly feel obligated to respond and engage with clients at a different level. That vacation time is so, 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 so important. And it moves us nicely into addressing burnout. There's my little minion. He just says, being sick is just your body's way of saying you're too awesome and you need to slow down so everyone else can catch up. I love that. And it actually, I put it in there because I encourage my staff to use sick days as mental health days as well. Of course, if they can use sick days, obviously, but I don't limit them to that. And my supervisor allows that as well. So that's kind of an agency culture here at Whitman Walker, that you may use sick time to go to the doctor if you're sick, and also a mental health day. And so I think that's important, that if they just need to take the day off because they're feeling completely overwhelmed, or even if it's a half a day, then they need to do it, and that's okay. I've given them permission to explore that. I've actually encouraged them, when I start to sense that somebody's feeling tired and exhausted, have you considered looking at your schedule next Friday and taking the day off? And then that gives them permission to explore that. One of the things that we started is a strengths-based day and a deficits day. So, social workers, we operate from a strengths-based perspective, and we're always reframing things. And one day, one of my team members just said, you know what, I'm just not feeling that today. I'm really kind of grumpy. I'm not feeling it. And deficits day was born. So every once in a while, we designate a deficits day, and we announce it because somebody needs it. And within the office, in the protection and the safety of the office, you are allowed to not operate from strengths base. So you are allowed, and it actually becomes comical because people go out of their way to try and talk from a deficits base, and it actually lightens the mood and helps people feel better. Obviously, with clients, with external staff, even with internal staff not on our team, we operate from a strengths-based perspective, but giving people permission to feel the way they feel within your team has actually very quickly turned moods around. I was actually surprised by how quickly that worked. And I bought mason jars and filled the mason jars with those little craft puffy balls that you can glue on things and make clouds and those kinds of things. And so they have them in the back in jars, and if they just are having a deficits day, they can take them out and throw them on the floor. They can say, you know what, here I'm going to move all of my, I'm going to take my deficit balls and put them into my jar and fill up my jar, and when the jar gets full, then you know what, I have to be over my mood. So we've used those puffy balls in a variety of ways, and deficits day and strengths-based day has really taken life in our office. I try to demonstrate appreciation regularly, if that's bringing in Dunkin' Donuts munchkins every once in a while, if that's just saying thank you, if that's giving them a shout out to the leaders of the agency. I try to demonstrate appreciation regularly, and in turn they actually do the same for me, which can feel really good as a supervisor. I encourage a lunch hour. By union regulations, my staff are actually unionized. They are required, and I'm required to give that to them. But they're so dedicated and they work like crazy that I actually have to say, no, let's take your lunch, go away, or go eat together, or let's go out for a walk, or put your phone down, put it on my desk, and go search for a vacation on your computer. Again, I talked about vacation boundaries, emails. So a former boss of mine told me the best thing, one of the best things he ever taught me was, Even if I'm working at 2 in the morning, I will never send an email to my team. I will save it in my drafts, and I will hit send at 7 o'clock the next morning if necessary. Because by sending an email in the middle of the night, I am setting the tone with my staff that they are expected to be working just like me. And if you want to have my position one day, guess what? You need to be working at 2 in the morning. And you know what the case may be? It could be that my kid woke up with a nightmare and I can't fall back to sleep, so I'm just going to tackle a few things while I'm awake. Not that, I'm taxed and I'm working 20 hours a day. And that was a really important lesson that he taught me. So I encourage people, go ahead, work at 2 in the morning if you want. Never hit send. It sends a bad message about the boundaries you've set for yourself. It sends a bad message about your work-life balance. And I think it's really important to set that stage with staff that you do not expect them to respond. I allow for wellness and workouts if people are going to work late, but they want to go take off, flex out 2 hours in the middle of the day. Let's say they came in at 8 and they actually need to go work an appointment at 8, but they're only supposed to be working 7.5 hours a day. They can take a chunk off in the middle of the day and go do Zumba or go do yoga. We actually have staff yoga days at one of our health centers where at 5:30 every day one of our yoga-trained staff leads staff yoga for free. And finally, this outside debriefing and support for secondary trauma. So when I mentioned that traumatic death we had, I brought in a trauma expert who debriefed our staff. She did. It wasn't a training. It was almost. I almost liken it to not to group therapy because there wasn't really self-disclosure except around the impact of the trauma on us. And she walked us through self-care and recognizing the signs. And at that moment, people were able to connect what they were feeling with what they had experienced. And it really helped people be mindful of that and just start to heal. I don't say move on, but they were able to start. The other way I think we can keep people are opportunities for growth, and I think this is kind of a no-brainer. Professional development is incredibly important, but I also think it's, and we'll talk about that in a second, I think finding opportunities for staff to present, maybe they're going to co-present with you, and then, or you're going to attend their presentation and provide support. I invite them to sit on strategic planning meetings as much as possible at the agency. And then I've actually identified committees that they can go and sit on that I don't have to sit on. And that gives them exposure to a different level of leadership. It demonstrates that you value them, that you trust them to represent your program or your department or your committee. And it really gives them an opportunity to strengthen a different muscle. And so I think that was a great opportunity for some of my team. And while they've been super nervous about it at the start, I've actually seen them grow in it, and it's been fun. And I'm going to put a pin in professional development because we'll talk about that in a minute. One of the most important things, I think, is building a community among your team. Like I said, we operate from a team approach here. I think it's important that they feel valued, feel respected, and that's letting them be heard, not dismissing it with, yeah, but this was the reason it was made, and shutting down their idea. It's let's explore this, and is there a different way to approach it? Seating arrangements. It's interesting. We started out here with 2 people sharing offices. 2 people would share an office, another 2 people would share an office, another 2 people would share an office. And we had some space free up, and we actually all moved to cubicles near each other. And what I found, at first I thought that was going to be super distracting as people were making phone calls and entering notes and kind of chatting. It's actually built community. So we are able to do more on-the-fly group supervision. We are able to hang up the phone and say, oh my gosh, you're not going to believe what just happened. We're able to celebrate successes. And there's this intrinsic respect that if you're going to have a long, drawn-out conversation, you go downstairs and you engage in that in the privacy of a room, both for client confidentiality as well as to not disrupt other staff. But I was really surprised by how moving our team into one spot to be near each other built a sense of community. I think team meetings, meeting regularly, again, you could have death by meetings, but we do Monday morning check-ins real briefly. They're not allowed to last any more than 30 minutes. What's going on this week? What do you need support in? What are you dreading? What are you excited about? How can I support you? And it's a round robin. Everybody goes around, and that's how our community health worker is able to step in and say, I can cover that. I got this. I'm going here. Great, great, great. And I found that really sets the tone for the week. But I think fun is the most important one on this slide. And actually tomorrow our team is going to the National Zoo. It's a free zoo in Washington, D.C. I've set up some behind-the-scenes tours that I know somebody who works there, and we're taking the day. We're all going. Cell phones stay off. Emails have an out of office on them, and we're all going to the zoo together to hang out with the small mammals in the small mammal house and go to the bird house and just connect as people. And they are ridiculously excited about it. And it's free. So look for things that are free. At Christmas time, we did a brunch at my house. So what can you do collectively together as a team?
And Melissa, I know you're wrapping up, but we do have a few questions, so I just wanted to give you that heads up. We have about 6 minutes left here.
Okay, let me do professional development, and then we can answer questions because it should take 30 seconds.
Great.
Professional development is important, but the only point that I really want to make, because I feel like this is fairly obvious, is that as a supervisor, what I have found incredibly invigorating is to engage in my own professional development. When I go out and do a training for myself, which sometimes people forget to look for yourself, I come back invigorated with new skills that I want to share with my team, with new ways to provide supervision, with new ways to engage in clients, and I think that can be really invigorating. So not only looking for it for your team, but also looking for it for yourself. All right, Amanda, it might be a good time to look at questions.
Sure. So the first one is about panel interviews.
Yeah.
And the question is, do you have all your staff participate in the panel, or do you choose a couple of them? I'm asking because my team is comprised of 6 people. Would that not be overwhelming to the person being in?
That's a great question. So 6 people plus yourself is 7. It totally could be overwhelming. I always prep the candidate that these are panel interviews. And I invite every member of my team, and there are 6 of us total as well. And usually not everybody can attend because they've got client demands. So I try to get at least 3 of them to attend, and those 3 need to be present for all of the interviews so that we can have good comparison, and then the others can come in as necessary. But it's not vital that everybody be there.
Great, thank you. Somebody noted that the link for the article, What I Wish I Had Known, doesn't seem to be working. So maybe we can find a better link and send that out in the email after.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Great. And then can you clarify weekly supervision? What does it look like? Is it group supervision? Is it one-on-one? I'm the ED at a crisis agency, and I'm not sure how to provide meaningful supervision on a weekly basis. Do you have any suggestions?
Good question. I provide weekly individual supervision for 1 hour for all of my staff. And at one point when I had interns on board, I was providing 13 hours of supervision a week, and it killed me, so I cut back on interns. But every staff has a recurring time slot. We set it up, and so every Wednesday at 5:30, I know I'm meeting with Bobby. And so he can work his schedule around that. I can work my schedule around that. And there are times that one of us needs to cancel, but we try to hold that sacred. So every week I set aside that time for my team. What they have also done is set up a once-a-month case conference where they're providing peer group supervision to each other. That doesn't meet as regularly because they tend to not stick to it as much as they had hoped they would. Clients' schedules kind of get in the way. But that's another way to provide supervision. And I give them the option of am I there or am I not? Because if they just want to have a, oh my God, Melissa's so annoying this week conversation, they can. Or if they want to have me in the building and come get me if something comes up if they need support, or they can choose to have me present and my feelings don't get hurt either way. So individual clinical supervision for each staff member weekly, and then group supervision as much as we're able to.
And does that change at all for new hires? Is it more frequent or longer, or is it about the same?
So for new hires, I will have more frequent administrative supervision. I will still have weekly clinical supervision for 1 hour, but I might be meeting with a new hire more often to check in on their notes, help them understand the paperwork, help them understand office dynamics. So administrative supervision is much more frequent for new hires, but clinical supervision stays the same. And the other thing to note is that I talked about the seating arrangement for my staff. That has actually facilitated a natural process of group supervision. So somebody hangs up the phone, somebody's got an issue, they all wrap around that person. So it's almost become more natural and organic by changing the seating arrangement.
That makes a lot of sense. That's it for questions right now. I don't know if you wanted to go through that last slide real fast with the resources before we close up here.
Yeah, sure. The only other thing to say is that when people leave and they're successful, I feel like that's a great reflection of my competency. So it's just a reframe. They're not leaving me; they're actually leaving because of me, and so I think that can be really helpful. But there are a ton. If you just Google compassion fatigue or burnout or social workers and stress, a whole litany of stuff will pop up. And these were the ones that just popped up in some of my work that I've got kind of bookmarked on my computer. And again, there's tons of stuff out there. Psychology Today, selfcareandsocialwork.com actually has a compassion fatigue scale that you can go and do. And then Social Work Today has an article. But I would just encourage people to, based on where you are in the location, to Google and see what speaks to you and to test things out, because what's going to work at my agency might need to be modified a little bit for your own setting.
Melissa, thank you so much. Yeah, this has been great. For anybody who's interested, we did record the session, so if there are folks that you want to share it with, it will be available on our website, aia.berkeley.edu, within about a week. We do greatly value and consider the feedback of everybody participating on these calls. The link for a brief online evaluation form will appear when you click out of this meeting. Please just take a few minutes now to complete the form, and it will automatically be sent back to us. For those of you who are interested, our next learning cluster is on adapting the evidence-based program Promoting First Relationships for a Trauma-Informed Population, and that's on April 12th. And again, you can find more information on our website along with registration information, aia.berkeley.edu. Thank you again. Thank you, Melissa, and I hope everybody has a wonderful day.
Thank you.